in the distance, of course, today. Um, I decided to get this one in just because I'm kind of busy and thought I had more than enough material to go through at this point. Like, we don't need like an hour and a half show live at the beach, and there's no time for that anyway. But so we'll just get into the major stuff. Apparently, Michelle Obama is up for becoming president potentially as a candidate for the Democratic Party. I'm just going to remind you because this is simply stated season 5. We're into odds and ends. Michelle has really severe neurocognitive disorder issues, and she frankly had to be put into an institution and treated when she was in the D.C. area. Remember, Michael Swanberg had her running around all over the place, and she was being crazy. Um, Obviously, if you come here for like red meat for the Democratic or the Republican Party, you're not going to get it. I'm only going to do actual journalism and reporting, but she actually had to be restrained from visiting one of my clients when I worked in home health, and is frankly on medication, lives in a dementia ward on most days, and then just comes out and does her show. I know all this because the U.S. government actually asked me what to do with her because of her many issues. Also, I think for this episode, I decided it would be fun to do something that would be quasi-patriotic, but not. I found this hat. It's kind of funny. It's literally both. It looks like it could be a French flag, an English flag, or like a U.S. flag, which is like you don't really know which one it is. Um, you know, it's got the glitter on it, the whole thing. I just thought it'd be really funny to get out for a minute and remind you that I'm also on OnlyFans at Deborah K, DeborahKay. So, but I'm going to go ahead and put it away now. I just think it's really funny because it's obviously not really a U.S. hat or a French flag hat or British hat. It's just got like all three colors. So, funny stuff. Good. You want geopolitics? I can give you some of that here. So, anyways, but no, Michelle Obama is not clinically stable enough to be a president of this country. Of course, we've already had a number of unstable presidents, and we already have, of course, Donald Trump as president, who's basically a raging meth addict and borderline. So, maybe you really don't care. Maybe you'd be fine with having her as president, him as president, because Michelle's actually a man. But I have a feeling that's going to be a big no-go since Barack Obama already had so many political issues and financial problems with her actually photoshopping herself and with her turning out to be Russian and his long-term relationship with Jennifer Aniston as far as anyone knows. And there's also the very distinct reality that he got in trouble for being involved with Netflix, and that was because of her. They really can't come back to do another joint presidency at this point. It just simply won't work out for them financially. So, too many problems for her to be president, to be next Democrat candidate for president, and not a good one. So, do you need to know that there was a problem with Homer? He called himself Homer out of, Luther College, that harassing me and wanting to remind me of the issues. And what I'm going to remind all of you of is that it's a clinical issue in this country, at least healthcare-wise, with people developing PTSD simply because they've been raped or beaten on as kids. And the stupid hate groups out of the KKK, the CCP, and the Russian FSB just follow them around for the rest of their lives, bitching at them and demanding them to do lawsuits, which they can't do under the U.S. legal system. By the way, I have no idea where Cassie was, P. Diddy's girlfriend, who's probably his real wife, was able to get away with the $30 million within 2 suits out in California. Whichever judges gave those to her actually need to be just literally just thrown out of the system. What I would remind the rest of you of is some of the shows are actually put together to remind you that the U.S. legal system actually doesn't allow for people to simply rape and beat on individuals, harass them, and then pay fines over it, which is what a lawsuit is. They actually owe prison time for it and have to actually go through punitive measures. So you don't have the right to follow victims around. You actually may end up being thrown in prison yourself over it. And also, it's considered a type of, you want to call it perjury, you want to call it larceny, you want to call it fraud, but you can't just go around setting up fake harassment suits all over the place. People do have the right to assert themselves and say, get off of me, don't harass me, don't touch me, back up. That's part of the U.S. legal system. But you don't have the right to demand that they sue you or to try to set up fraudulent lawsuits. And then there's also just to remind you that, Tulsi Gabbard hasn't officially left yet. She had strong KGB connections, and she's still technically working in the U.S. government. Of course, you know that she'll just be simply fading back into Booz Allen Hamilton, a company that was literally sued by the U.S. government and frankly mostly represents the interests of Russia and China. If the U.S. military were actively involved in Ukraine would just be simply fucked. I would just call the show that, like, why the Ukraine would be simply fucked if the U.S. government was actually allowed to do military intervention there, because it would be everything for Putin. I have to read a comment that was sent to me on Senator John Thune, the majority leader of the Senate. I'm not going to get into the majority speaker of the House right now, Mike Johnson. He's had a hard enough time with being recently threatened by the up-and-coming guys in Democratic Party leadership for the Democratic Party. I think Hakeem Jeffries is fine, but whoever this weirdo was, he was threatening to kill Mike Johnson today. It was just really strange. But there's been a comment made on John that he's never been a very professional person to work with, and he's known to be a child predator himself based on behavior, as well as the other neocon senators previously mentioned in other shows, which explains his comments about the Taliban and relating to them and being one of them. So there you go. I also need to note that someone asked for the comment to put in that Patrick Witzel, formerly of Endeavor Corporation, or still of it, put an awful lot of mess together for all of us to go through in order for him to be married to some weird CRISPR model from Peru who is apparently Mary Catherine Ham. And that's who Perry Witzel turned out to be in the end. I need to note that it's been determined finally that the woman who raped and beat me at Arlington County is actually in a sexual relationship with Freddie Klein, who also attacked the U.S. Capitol like 6 years ago. Israel is considering replacing Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay. I don't know. Let's see. Does anyone believe that Albania is actually protesting Russia and doesn't actually agree with them? That they're actually in an argument with them over the real estate issues in Albania right now? I don't, and I'll tell you why. Albania had a long history and has a long history, and we saw this specifically with Fatina did the investigations, that they'll have these fake arguments. And remember, she said she was going to pretend that she was on the side of Palestine, and said she thought I'd take Palestine's side in the conflict with Israel. I, of course, learned through all these experiences because you simply said not getting involved in anything with Israel and Palestine. All of us need to be out of it because there's too much investing by Russia and China in Israel and Palestine, the fight there. All you have to do is look at what happened to Ariel Sharon. You know you don't want to be involved in it, right? The man did everything he could to create peace, and they simply put the guy in a coma and then eventually took him off life support. So, do we believe this story is coming out of Albania? Does anyone believe that watches this show regularly agrees with me at all? That the Albanians aren't just simply literally going through a process of destroying properties and collecting insurance, because that's obviously what they're doing, right? Why would we know this? Because the history of destroying properties in the past, which the Russian government and the KKK and the FSB and the Chinese CCP have always engaged in simply destroying properties and collecting insurance. So while everything in Albania is not a true fight with Russia, they're just simply destroying properties and collecting the insurance money. No. Don't get crazy and think Jared Kushner and Ivanka aren't just dork Russian KGB, KKK idiots at this point. It's definitely about money laundering, which is what real estate is oftentimes used to do by labor traffickers and especially anything Russian. So they're just destroying the properties for the insurance money, people. I have to note that, of course, Moscow has been hit. There's just way too many issues, I think, here in the U.S. What I want to point out for you is that Ukraine is pretty actively going after Russian FSB and their GRU, and then ostensibly you have to figure the Chinese CCP as well. And so if they make any attacks in the U.S., one of the problems we saw during the investigations was that Cersei and Wilhelm, when people would want to hit charges at them, like in restaurants in the D.C. area when I was out with them, they would try to have them transferred to me so they could enjoy their meals. That's still a problem in the modern day workplace. I unfortunately have to work with some people who are obviously Russian FSB or even Russian GRU that need to remove from the U.S. and they've been getting hit with charges to leave, and they're trying to transfer them to myself or other people who are actually citizens in the workplace. Frankly, I'm tired of it. Same with the Chinese CCP. And that's enough. I'm not going to sit around and be hit because you don't belong here and we're told to go home. I'm certainly not going to be hit because you got into a beef with the Ukraine. That's your problem. You don't belong in this country. You weren't invited to stay here, and certainly not to get the rest of us hit and beat on at work, at our actual employment. Clive Davis has finally passed away at 94 years old. It's important to note that he was actually Ashkenazi Russian and Israeli. As most of you probably realize from the show, the Ashkenazi Russians don't share ancestry with those of us who are actually Sephardic or Mizrahi Jews, which I happen to be Mizrahi Jewish, at least partially, and we have literally no relationship to them. We are unfortunately a group that was beat up on and abused in Israel, and most of us have simply left Israel behind. My father was Assyrian, he was of Syrian Jewish ancestry, so, and Mizrahi Jew. As far as what happened to Whitney Houston, I totally blame Clive Davis for what happened to her. Most of you probably think, well, we wouldn't know Whitney if it wasn't for Clive, and I'm saying Whitney would have had a better life without Clive Davis. She could have just simply lived her life. Instead, she ended up being raped and beaten and tortured to death by the old KGB and members of the KKK and, frankly, Kevin Costner. So there's nothing to be sad about with the loss of Clive Davis. What's sad is that he got to live to be 94 years old. It's important to note that there's been a few people up the Petoskey area giving the old ISIS signal with the weird fuzzy hair and glowing eyes, and sort of the equivalent of putting on some weird Halloween mask and running around up there. It's a very disassociative behavior on their part of the people from the Russian, PCUSA, B'nai B'rith, any of the hate groups resort to whenever they feel threatened. And so with the attacks in Moscow and all over Russia at this point, which have been actively going on, you're probably going to see more behaviors like that across the U.S. for people who simply support Russia that are having what's called a breakdown. Halloween mask behavior, inappropriateness in the workplace, in the public, in stores, maybe at the beach, wherever. That's all it is. I need to know for you that Representative Jim Nussle of Iowa, Republican of Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa, turned out to be married to Katie Couric. Just a reminder, old KGB, FSB of Russia, and set up a number of terrorist cells and tried to train kids to be terrorists. And he got caught by the actual Sikhs of India, the government of India, actually, when he was working in the D.C. area. He finally got to OMB. People just said, oh my God, we got to get this guy out if he were getting completely crazy. This is episode 33, season 5. It's really important to know this because it was actually the Indian government and MI6 that finally traced the whole thing. The rest of us were having a really hard time with it. All anybody knew is that there were problems with the Gang of Five and that Senator John McCain was grossly undermined in his part, and so were the other men. For some reason, Jim Nussle wasn't, and it was actually the good old Swiss Miss out of Iowa, Michelle Ingerson, who turned him in, but Michelle Ingerson is actually old KGB herself, so called the FSB of Russia. I also need to note for you that, let's see. Booker, Thune, Fetterman, Hawley are all proudly members of the KGB, old KGB, which is called the FSB of Russia today. And they're all in the U.S. Senate. Let's see, what else? You need to remember that Kourtney Kardashian and Khloe have gotten in trouble at one point for impersonating Blaze of MI6. It was always considered questionable that I had supposedly talked to Blaze of MI6, and she thought the simple answer for me was just to go to the store or wherever when I was in Charlottesville and simply wear a mask so people wouldn't bother me, when in reality I was down there and stuff to be labor trafficked, and then ended up actually getting I was actually branded at the time. So the whole thing is just totally weird. So no, nobody's really, you have to be careful when trying to impersonate leaders of major organizations that are still respected. On the other hand, nobody really wants to be out doing work for free for MI6, so there you go. Just a reminder, Tori Amos turned out to be part of the Shining Path. If you remember, Cersei told me I wasn't allowed to continue playing piano, and when I was a young kid, to give it up. And I actually had to work on the album Little Earthquakes, and that one I actually wasn't paid for. I was paid later in Janesville. The person who set that up, I was paid to do some background scene work for her. The person who set all that up actually ended up got in trouble eventually for it. Unfortunately, what happened in Janesville was that Yoko Ono went by the name Teriko Hebron. Dubuque had wanted to actually have me move to Japan with her and her family, and so that I wouldn't be sent through all this nasty labor trafficking. And I wasn't able to go because the government of Iowa State firmly believes in trafficking kids and in labor trafficking people. I can't understand why people hate the state. I went to Wisconsin, and then there was just more steps there, unfortunately. And it wasn't the exact same situation, but it was still pretty bad. So it's important to remember in all this that Tori Amos turned to be a member of the Shining Path and not considered a legitimate musician. It really wouldn't matter how much she sang or how much piano she played, because she simply And it was discovered when she was at RAIN, actually, as a national speaker, that they finally realized that she was frankly tied to communist groups and was just simply there to undermine and even abuse victims herself. So, you can see how the setup goes. What I certainly wouldn't do is get into going to any sort of quote unquote women's events where you're supposed to feel comfortable to talk about your experiences and your violations or get into worshiping Tory. It's just a waste of your time. Um, you can finally say that now. Like, I got sick of the Tory people because too many of them seem to be brainwashed. I was forced to listen to a lot of her music simply because she was one of Cersei's clients, but it means she's really no different than, like, Britney Spears, for example. I need to know for you that Janelle Bakani is alive. She's Chinese CCP. She was the woman that got in trouble for ruining the financial office over at the State Department. When I was leaving the DC area, I turned her in and she was fired. She actually is an employee at Booz Allen Hamilton. And notably, she's been hanging out in Petoskey and also Sheboygan, and she's famous for trafficking kids and other women. And she's a pervert and a weirdo. And I think is up basically to be dead in the U.S. I thought she was going to be in prison, but she's apparently not serving her prison time, which means she's literally just at the point of possibly being killed off. That she's alive and walking around and up to her weird old antics, so especially with kids. I'm just going to caution you on something. Mike Johnson recently came out and cautioned people in the Democratic Party and the surges and Bolsheviks, people working for Russia and China. They're trying to get elected in the next election cycle for the federal government. It's important to remember that Pam Bondi and some of these other extremists had actually been planning to put in a bunch of people in the next election cycle who would simply be supportive of labor trafficking. So what you don't want to do right now is get pushed too far in either direction. Pay attention to who people are locally and who you vote for, but certainly don't get on the we've got to be big-time Democrats now, we're going to be big-time Republicans. Think through issues logically. If you can't, then don't get involved. I'm just going to comment briefly on this. The Senate, what is this, the news this week of the Senate and the president fighting over a housing bill? I saw their most ridiculous coverage where they claim that Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana was yelling, and the footage he's talking very quietly, and normally one I know with the temper would be Donald Trump, and the other one would actually be Senator Thune. They did some kind of appearance where Trump told me he was fine. Here's the thing. When you're talking about the Senate, you're talking about way too many old people and way too many enforcers with power, with mental issues out of Russia and China who don't belong in the U.S. government at all. And, that counts on the women. And, if you're going to go to a meet with them, you might as well just show up with some Depends. They literally just shit themselves. They're old, weird. Maybe you need some Collate, give them some anti-diarrheals, laxatives, I don't know, maybe anti-laxatives, like, whatever you call it. That's an anti-diarrheal, by the way. But, maybe it's just time to show up with some anti-mimetics or water. It's just, they're nuts. And I think Thune was especially crazy in the sense that he tried to pass himself off as some guy who wore masks and hung out with women that were attractive. And, in the end, he's just some weirdo who's into raping on and trafficking kids and frankly beating people up and asking them to work for free for Endeavor Corporation, which is a Russian company that shows a bunch of justice and apparently manages everything Donald Trump does. You also have the ridiculous fair down in DC right now, which is literally full of meth heads and not a safe event to be at. I would assume Michelle Ingerson would be there planning to work as a whore and kill people, which is probably what she did around Washington DC. It graduated to Luther College in Iowa. So, big meth head fest looks like an Iowa State fair where they traffic kids. Not a great place to go. Let's see. Yeah, there's a woman who used to work as a nursing professor at Georgetown University by the name Chris, worked on nursing fundamentals. She's been hanging out in Petoskey. Also an activist, extremist for the communist movements, Bolsheviks, very much part of ISIS. So I just be aware of that person's around. Someone needs to be arrested, frankly, put in prison, or who knows, maybe looking at bringing back the death penalty pretty soon with the way this is going. Michigan certainly works differently than the rest of the country, so it's kind of weird to see any of these people bothering. You wouldn't have the same, resources in the state of Michigan that you would have had in, like, Virginia or even Maryland or the DC area. So it's just weird to see these people try this stuff in, like, a different state, different part of the country. I do need to note and congratulate Michigan State that the men's basketball team became national champions. Unfortunately, Dusty May is now going to be leaving as a coach, which kind of sucks. And then also, I've been playing around with makeup, and I've been thinking that the Prolux at Dollar Tree is nowhere near as good as Rimmel. do also like Wet n Wild Photo Foundation, but the Proto or Prolux just isn't that really worth it. It's only $1 though, but the colors are almost never right. So if you get it, you're gonna have to mix it with another foundation. I'm just letting you know. On the Ukraine, Putin has announced that he plans to attack Poland and the Baltic as his own army and military are threatening to kill it. So this is going to get really interesting. Additionally, the ambassador to Russia is from Belarus, Lukashenko, has said that Belarus does not want to be dragged into war by Russia, so they want to be left out of it and will not be helping. Also, Germany is facing growing waves of Nazi movements, communist movements, and fascism. Additionally, you need to note that Epstein's former assistant, Leslie Kraft, has gone ahead and said that she is going to begin relaying information on phone calls that she set up between Epstein and Trump for years, decades. And this is all as there have been a number of arrests at the reflecting pool and literally no arrests on anybody involved with Epstein and Trump. Yeah, I'm talking about the Lincoln reflecting pool. Also from The Intercept, apparently New York cops are upset about Mangione setting up a class war against corporate executives and those being attacked over stresses on the lower class and middle class. I'm very stressed out and I'm in the middle class. That Mangione killed the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in 2024. It's important that Donald Trump actually met with him and saw nothing wrong with him, and also Donald Trump talked a big game about doing something about Mangione and didn't. And it's also important that he also said he was going to do something about the New York Mayor Mamdani and met with him and didn't do anything about it. I would think if you have a problem with a class war in New York State, it would be more of an issue with Mamdani actually stirring people up. I also want to note that you have a growing wave of fascism. You've got too much Russian KGB, FSB activity, and they like to stir up guerrillas to get into fights and cause problems and setups. And when you have a president that condones that and is cool with guerrilla behavior, there's not really a lot to be said or done. So, anyways, I just simply would waste my time on any of it. This is me, Deborah K, signing off in a hat. Have a good one. Oh, I guess I should show you what I look like standing up. By the way, I took my last yoga ad off because it was having problems with the stream. Somebody had messed up my legs and tried to make them look like they were too short in it. It's been an ongoing issues with shows with people hacking them, and I'm still tracking it, so.
How you doing, Jim?
Have a good one.